I have grandchildren, children, friends, loved one, an organic garden, an organic orchard, all living in this area. So I began to research it and was stunned and horrified at the story that started to unravel. And when I realized that they were actually going to do this and that it made no sense to me and it looked very, very dangerous, then I started to get active. I just started going on the internet and reading everything I could, and then just finding every thread that didn't make sense and just Googling the answers, looking into what are the ingredients and who's making the decisions, who's making money off of this, what could possibly be the motivations to spray millions of people with unknown toxins. What I found was that, first of all, the ingredients, once they had to disclose them, are not inert in the traditional sense of the word in terms of inactive. They're simply not the so-called pesticide part, and that the other ones include things that give you rashes, damage your eyes, can cause cancer, and then the list goes on, and as well as potentially affecting reproductive systems, especially in women, but men as well. And the notion of having this happen to anyone, much less pregnant women and children and disabled people, was just unacceptable. So I started trying to follow the trail of why in the world would they be doing this? And a number of us got together to create the California Alliance to Stop the Spray and sort of divvied up the work. We got together to make sure that we weren't being redundant in our efforts, and divided up what we thought were the key categories like the economics, the political aspect, the legal aspect, the health, the environment, the outreach, media, public relations, and so forth, and just divided up all the categories, and then had a town hall meeting where we informed people what we knew and invited people to join in and to just come to whatever action team they wanted to. And then started a whole process of kind of just natural selection of leadership, of who had time to do what and who was good at what. And this beautiful alliance emerged of people bringing in their passions and skills and actually being able to do something about the intense concerns they had about what was coming our way. The group that I joined was the Follow the Money group. My wife is a journalist, and she said she was trained early on, if the story didn't make sense, follow the money. So we just started swimming upstream into what are the motivations here, who's benefiting, and who's losing. And some of the things that we found were that at the same time that the state was looking to spend between $100 to $500 million, possibly more, to spray for a so-called pest that not only has caused no damage so far in California, but is only considered to be a minor pest in the countries where it's either native or has moved to, over the past century, that somebody must be benefiting from this. So we look to see who that might be. And there are many levels of this. One of the beneficiaries is a couple named Stuart and Faye Resnick, who are billionaire business owners who are the major citrus growers in the whole country. And they have a company called Roll International with many subsidiaries. One of the subsidiary is a company called Paramount, and they grow citrus, they grow nuts, a number of products. And they had been one of the beneficiaries of the quarantine that the U.S. imposed on Australia and New Zealand a number of years ago against this moth, the light brown apple moth, in addition to a number of other so-called pests. And so that they were able to benefit from the limiting of foreign imports on certain crops. Now that they have found that moth here, our quarantines have come back to bite us, because Canada and Mexico, who went along with our quarantine in order to stay in our good graces have now quarantined against us for this moth, which has so far caused no damage. Now, the Resnicks also ended up buying a chemical company back in 2001 called Concept, which was failing at the time, but it made chemicals for spraying and was developing the pheromone spray. So they bought that company, and since that time, that company has, according to their public relations, increased its profits by about 25% a year since then. And so, it helps to have friends in high places, and they were one of the largest donors to Schwarzenegger in his gubernatorial campaign, even though they're lifelong Democrats. They contributed $144,600 to that campaign. And Schwarzenegger was quoted as saying during his campaign, if you take money from these big wealthy money interests, then you owe them something. Well, Schwarzenegger was the one who okayed this emergency declaration that has allowed the USDA and the CDFA to sidestep having to have an environmental impact report, having to do true public hearings before starting to dump these toxins, on our properties and into our lungs. So something seemed a little fishy there. But it turns out that the Resnicks not only now wouldn't have to spray for this on all of their orchards, but they also stand to make hundreds of millions of dollars in windfall profits from the spraying, from providing the spray, just in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area alone. First of all, they're spending hundreds of millions just to try to combat this little moth that hasn't caused any problems. But secondly, we started to look and see. I had some friends who were going to come and visit during that time, and I suggested that they not come and expose themselves to that spray. They were coming from Southern California. And I'm really glad that they didn't, with all the hundreds of people who got sick. I knew someone who had just bought a house, and they said, I wouldn't have bought a house here if I had known. I've talked to real estate agents who said, oh my God, we're going to have to disclose to our clients that they're buying houses where they're going to be immersed in toxins continually during the dry seasons, 9-10 months a year, for potentially 3 to 10 years. What is that going to do to not only the revenues of real estate agents, but to the value of everybody's home in 9 counties around the Bay Area of San Francisco? So we started talking to the realtors and collecting some numbers, talking to the Chamber of Commerce, talking to the organic farm growers, and we started to put together some numbers. And here's just a brief survey of the sorts of impacts that, being as conservative as we can and still being somewhat realistic, if you total all 9 counties and put together the estimated losses for tourism, tourism-related construction, tourism-related taxes, and then the losses on sales of organic farming. If you total all 9 counties, the losses just from those are estimated at, figuring 1%, a 1% decrease in revenues. That's under the 1.3% that the CDFA used for agriculture extrapolation. And some of our staff, or one of them is a statistician, he recommends it's probably more like 10%. But at 1% for the 9 counties, that's a $200 million loss annually. At 10%, it's a $2 billion loss. Then you start looking at the real estate values. At the 1% figure, for the 9 counties, the reduction in values of residential homes alone for the 9 counties, $16.8 billion. At 10%, it's $168 billion. Now, fortunately, there are many, many laws and statutes which are being broken. There are over 30 laws, regulations, and international ethical and moral guidelines that are being violated by this spray. So the lawyers are lining up, the lawsuits are being filed, and hopefully they will back off on this soon and find a graceful way out. But in addition, it turns out that these chemicals have particles of such a small size that they actually penetrate the skin, penetrate the lungs, and lodge. And we haven't been consulted and asked permission to do this. So the bottom line is they're doing a medical experiment on millions of people without our permission, and there are penalties for doing medical experiments on people without their informed consent. And those range from $1,000 to $10,000. So for totaling all 9 counties at the 1% rate, the penalties to the people perpetrating this, and that includes representatives of chemical companies, at the 1% rate, $680 million. At the 10% rate, $6.8 billion. And accompanying these fines are also jail times, which mount into the many thousands of years very quickly. So the truth of the matter is, it would be really nice to find a win-win solution for this, where everybody could benefit. And fortunately, there are those solutions already. Many local scientists who are experts both in bugs and plants have researched this and traveled to New Zealand to check this out. And to put it in brief, if a sufficient number of the farmers would simply start replanting some of the native plants every 9th row, it's been proven to balance out the moth population. And then the pesticides aren't needed, then the health problems won't occur, then the lawsuits won't be filed, and that money, which is obviously available for agriculture, could actually go into subsidizing people, farmers transitioning at least from monoculture to polyculture planting, and ideally to organic farming. So then the question, of course, is, well, what can we do about this? One quick note on the Resnicks. When they started doing a pomegranate juice product, Faye Resnick took this one on and created what I understand to be a wonderful juice, pomegranate juice product that could have a lot of health benefits. They were doing animal testing on for the benefits of the pomegranate juice that were pretty brutal to the animals. And an animal rights group, Friends of the Animals, got onto this and started protesting outside their corporate offices.
Which are where?
In Los Angeles. And they were there for months. And it's reported that Stuart Resnick came out one day and yelled at the protesters, "I don't care if you protest for the next 45 years, we're not going to stop animal testing." And then a week later, Whole Foods threatened to take the pomegranate juice off of their shelves and stop selling their products. And a few days after that, there was a news conference, and the Resnicks announced that they would no longer be doing any animal testing and had no plans to in the future. So when people get a hold of the truth and are able to speak it broadly enough and relentlessly enough, sooner or later enough people wake up, and then even the corporate interests need ultimately to align with their customers. So that's one place to look. In terms of this moth, the good news about that is that in the USDA manual itself, there is a section on ceasing emergency actions, and there are 6 different ways, 6 different guidelines for doing that, and 4 of them are ones that if people realize what's really going on, that have satisfied already. I'll just mention the one that if there is sufficient socio-political opposition to render the emergency actions ineffective, then they can cancel the emergency. Well, To give them the benefit of the doubt, I don't think that the government I don't think they thought this through in terms of how intense the reaction would be. And I'm kind of glad that they started in the San Francisco and Monterey Bay areas, because there are a lot of discerning people here who care what they breathe and who care what they eat and are willing to stand up for their inalienable and constitutional rights. And so the backlash that is happening already, our local representative said he's never seen anything like it. There are already 5 and a 6th bill coming in the state legislature soon. There are groups organizing all over the entire Central and North Coast. There are already, just in a couple of months, over 11,000 signatures of people signing a petition and putting their names on a list of people who are ready to take action when the appropriately leveraged actions are called for and if they're necessary. So to give them the benefit of the doubt, let's say that the CDFA and the USDA actually didn't know a better way to handle a potential pest and they wanted to protect the farmers. Maybe they didn't think too much about the residents and the animals and all that stuff, but let's say they wanted to protect the business profits of some of the farmers, which is, an important thing to do. What our scientists are offering them is a inexpensive, viable, proven, safe, healthy way to do that through polyculture, through doing ground controls, using growth regulators as they have in New Zealand if anything starts to get out of hand. They're going to incur on themselves a loss of reputation, tremendous wrath amongst the taxpayers who have to pay for this, tremendous lawsuits through the violation of people's health, privacy, safety, on and on. And if the corporate interests are willing to realize that everybody's going to lose out of that, including them, there will be major boycotts against any corporation that participates in this, as well as campaigns to recall any politicians who support this. The graceful way out right now is to recognize, we didn't realize that these other methods were available. Let's declassify the pest. Let's downgrade the classification of the pest. Let's realize it's already here. It's not going to be realistically eradicated. So let's see if it's a problem. Meanwhile, let's subsidize healthy farming. And if we need any other supplementary actions, we do them in safe ways on the ground and restore confidence in the politicians, in the federal agencies, the agricultural agencies, and in the government itself. If the government agencies don't show that they can act responsibly, one of the things that's going on through perpetrating actions like this is communities are getting organized. Email networks and phone networks are being created, which will stay in place. And if they try to do this with other pests, with other weeds, you name whatever it is that threatens our health and violates our rights, these networks are now getting established locally, regionally, statewide, across the country and across the world, which is not going to tolerate that as supposedly the responsible actions of our representatives anymore. The USDA actually has certain criteria that are set forth in their emergency programs manual under which an emergency program can be terminated. The first one is the emergency project successfully eradicates the target pest. Well, the moth is already too widespread. It's never been eradicated in any country, much less by the pheromone method, which is untested. Number 2 is the target pest becomes established and available resources are insufficient for eradication. Well, it's already established. It's causing no problems. And the taxpayers, as they wake up to this, are going to be unwilling to continue to fund the poisoning of our own folks. Third, the target pest becomes established and a domestic quarantine is established. If necessary, that could happen, but there's no evidence that that would be necessary. Fourth is control measures, i.e. pest management, biological control, etc., are found and an emergency project is no longer necessary. Well, the control measures are already being proven in New Zealand, Australia, and Hawaii. So it's no longer necessary, even if it starts causing a problem. The fifth is socio-political opposition prevents emergency action. With what I'm seeing already in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties in just a couple of months, what's going to be happening throughout the Bay Area, if they try to continue, will be the largest social unrest that I will have seen since Vietnam. Perhaps even beyond that, because everyone will be breathing this stuff in. So some people say, could they really be doing this to us? I mean, would human beings, particularly that we've supposedly elected, would they actually spray harmful things on people? Well, it's useful to look back in the history of the government agencies, because there's documented evidence over the last 100 years that government agencies, including the USDA, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Navy, the Army, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and others, have intentionally subjected human beings covertly to harmful chemicals over 30 times, 14 of which involved aerial spraying. And one particularly relevant case was in 1994 in Oakville, California. Military aircraft began flying over the entire town of Oakville and dropping this gel-like substance. And the next day, everybody started getting sick with flu and pneumonia-like symptoms. Some people were hospitalized. Many people remained ill for months. Pets and barnyard animals were dying. So numerous independent labs started testing this gel, and they found human blood cells, nasty bacteria, and including a modified version of what they called Pseudomonas fluorescens, which is cited in over 160 military papers as an experimental biowarfare bacteria. So that's just one example. It's been done to prisoners, it's been done to Native Americans, it's been done to the homeless, it's been done to our own military numerous times, unbeknownst to them. So unfortunately, the record of whether or not government agencies would do this to their own people bodes very badly and is worth inspecting what's really going on here. Well, in terms of lessons learned, there are many already. One is that we need to be eternally vigilant. Two is that human beings, given the appropriate information, will stand up for themselves and one another and for their environment and for their animals and insects and take action, and they'll take action relentlessly until balance is restored. And that's what we see going on in here. And I'm, once again, just deeply moved by the power of the human spirit, and it's the willingness of individuals and organizations to work their asses off and take a stand for what we know to be safe, what we know to be fair, and what we know to be right.